mean but I was if I but things here American yeah, again, nonviolence is a very, very powerful tool. But what's important, I think, it's not that violence works or nonviolence works, or violence doesn't work or nonviolence doesn't work. It's strategically. You have to think strategically. So just like in guerrilla warfare, just like an electoral campaign or anything else, you have to say, where are my strengths and weaknesses? Where's the other side's strengths and weaknesses? How can I take advantage of their weaknesses? How can I best utilize my strength? You know, and you know when you have to think about, you know, when do you do a mass action? When do you do something that's a little safer and quieter, like a general strike? When is it time to mobilize cadre and kind of work and do the political education work? When is it time to move out? When do you organize the industrial working class or the peasants or the students, professional associations? What roles do they play? I mean, it's a very complicated thing. It's not just going out in the street and chanting slogans. You know, it's yeah, just like military campaigns or all sorts of different elements. But you know, it's funny. Around the world, we have military academies. You know, we have billions of dollars. You know, people thinking about how to wage war. Why can't we have nonviolent action academies? Why can't we put the same kind of resources in thinking strategically about nonviolent movements? Because it's all the more remarkable nonviolence has been successful as it has been, given we haven't put those kind of resources. And that's why I was mentioning about it might be a good time to start thinking about now what would happen if there's a coup or other things that might set back the democratic transition. And it takes planning, it takes strategic thinking, and that's more important than what's violent or nonviolent is what works. And you need to think about what would work.
Thank you for all the pride you mentioned in this interesting lecture for the Sudanese people and especially for Sudanese women. The question that did the American people expect the success of the December revolutions, and what is the reasons?
Sorry, ask that again.
Did the American people expect the success for the Sudanese revolution? They are expect this.
Yeah.
What is the reasons for they are expect the success of the Sudanese revolution?
America and are very happy about it. Unfortunately, not many Americans know about it. I mean, it was in the news, but you know, it was in the back pages of the newspaper. it may have had a brief mention on the television or radio. It was not, and you had to look for it. You had to, you didn't have to go on the internet and try to find information. I mean, one of the very sad things about the United States is that even though, given how important a role the United States plays in the world, America, and given how educated Americans are on a lot of things, we are very ignorant overall about other countries. In fact, most Americans don't know where Sudan is. I mean, I have a friend and a neighbor, he has a PhD, and he didn't know exactly where Sudan was. And so, I mean, there's an old joke that Americans learn geography by the countries we invade. So I think the lack of support is more out of ignorance than not caring, because when I occasionally will give a lecture and interview about Sudan in the United States. When people hear about it, wow, that's amazing. Really? How come I didn't hear about this? I mean, people are really, no, it's a great story. And so I think, again, this is my job. It's the job of people like me to get people to know about it. And again, the Sudanese American diaspora has been doing a very, very good job in the United States, Canada, Europe, getting the word out. So there's definitely respect and support for it. There's just, unfortunately, not a lot of knowledge or awareness.
So I have two questions. And so my name is Omar Jibril, and I do research in social media and violent resistance currently. So I have two questions, and they're mainly about the shift from hard power to soft power in the region. Mm-hmm. First of all, knowing very well that you have been a staunch opposer of the Iraq war and any sort of hard power intervention in the region or coup d'etat, which has been rampant in the region ever since the independence of Sudan. And now there is this kind of movement of non-violent resistance, which existed in India and other places, and kind of moving on to the Middle East. We have seen a lot of failure before, like Egypt and other areas like Syria and Libya, but we have seen a very good success in Tunisia. So the question is to you, do you think that this shift is also based on US-American policy shifting from hard power to soft power now that we have the prevalence of social media, so you can do semantic analysis on people to try to see where is the shift next, and it's less expensive than hard power, in my opinion. So the question is, there is a shift, in your opinion, in US policies in the region. The second question, that's the first question. The second question is, there are many researchers and professors in the US at Harvard and University of North Carolina, like Professor Erica at Harvard and History in North Carolina, that pointed out that many of these revolutions, when they start, they're kind of ill-experienced, and they're full of young people with a lot of energy. So the question that rises is, that later on they have weaker democratic institution, or no institution at all, and we can see this in Sudan here. And we have this idea of young people against old people. So we don't want the old people to tell us their experience, and some of them do hear, young people, many of them hear what old people are saying, but there is this kind of blinding, which is the result of the past 60 years policy of intervention from outside and inside people or countries. So these are the two questions. How do you resolve the institution, lack of rule of law, democracy, where young believe that they could do everything very fast?
And the great thing about Sudan is that you've had two previous nonviolent revolutions that temporarily succeeded, but then ended up failing. And so, okay, why weren't democratic institutions more fully consolidated after the overthrow of Aboud, after the overthrow of Numeri? What lessons can be learned from that? And so I think having input for those people who are involved in those struggles, can learn from past mistakes, can be useful. At the same time, I think the young people, not only is there a lot of energy and courage, but there's also a sense that the pressure for the older people not to compromise too much. You know, that keep that there's a willingness to you know, take these kinds of risks that are necessary to move the movement forward. At the same time, I think there is a tendency, a kind of impatience a lot of young people have about some of the aspects of a struggle that might not be as exciting. I mean, those of you who were out in the streets last year, you know, and in front of the military headquarters, there was the energy, the adrenaline rush. I mean, it was just, you know, I'm sure it was the most amazing experience. But there's less exciting aspects of a movement, such as political education, that is going into the neighborhoods, talking to people, listening to their concerns, you know, reminding them that they can get involved and what the issues are and what's keeping them down, what needs to happen, and what they can do, whether it be voter registration or whether it be organizing a union or other kinds of associations and taking part in things. You know, it means going door to door. It means, you know, things that are maybe less exciting than a big protest. So I think the importance is its importance in sustaining a movement that, again, may not be as exciting as the you know, actual initial uprising, but I think is critically important. I mean, there's the slogan of the Frelimo, the National Liberation Movement in Mozambique, was "A luta continua," the struggle continues. That is, you know, they were able to overthrow the Portuguese, but the colonialism had left the country with so many problems that people needed to continue to mobilize. And that slogan, "A luta continua," has been used in struggles around the world ever since, because it's a very important concept. In terms of soft power, hard power, you know, the governments, especially governments of big countries, especially governments of big countries that have long relied on military force, have a hard time getting out of the big power paradigm. And you know, there's you know, we see this manifested in Donald Trump, who thinks we can threaten and bomb our way to regain the kind of hegemony that the United States once had. Back in 1953, we did not like the government of Iran, so we sent in the CIA, cooperated with a few generals, paid off a few people, and we were able to stage a coup, which brought the Shah back into power. Obviously, we can't do that nowadays. The world's a lot more complicated. I mean, the United States used to sponsor coups in Latin America and elsewhere all the time. And, you know, it's much harder to do that. Similarly, we could send the Marines into certain countries and pacify things within a matter of days. Now that there's all sorts of resistance, that there is a and you know that you know, through the power of consumer boycotts, from the power of social networking, from the power of a grassroots organization, we are creating it's a much more complicated world. And for those who think simplistically and are used to throwing their weight around, you know, it's more difficult. I mean, as a parent, it was much easier to control my children when they were young than when they were teenagers. And it was frustrating that they would no longer listen to me like they used to. It was very hard to get used to that shift. And I think this is the thing that the United States is dealing with. We can't. We've treated much of the world, especially the developing world, like children, and they're saying, we're not children anymore. We're asserting our rights. We're asserting our autonomy. We're asserting our authority.
Some of us, as you are here in university, I think there is component very much a component the role of women played in the revolution. I think women played a decisive role which the revolution will not. So I want to hear something about the role of revolution. And in mind that these women just go out culture, within a culture that does not favoring women. Just go leading the protest, side by side by women, and so on. So I say I want to read something about this. I think the role of women need to be something more. I have a question. You think the world is going into a global war? Third global war?
Third World War?
Yeah.
No. No, I don't think that there will be a third world war, inshallah, in terms of nuclear war or something on the lines of World War I or World War II. But there's a risk, and it's very dangerous. I actually did not get much sleep last night because I'm considered an expert in U.S. Middle East policy. I kept getting phone calls from television and radio stations about the developments in Iraq, the United States, and Iran. And it's a real crisis point. Things are very, very dangerous, very disturbing. But what gives me some hope is that when the United States has gone to war before, they have often been able to convince people that it was somehow necessary. And when the country is in conflict, you don't want to criticize the government. Because they're saying, oh, if you don't support the war, you don't support the troops, you're not supporting your country, But this time they don't, and eventually people might mobilize against the war and force an end to it, like in Vietnam and other places. But this time, there seems to be a lot more resistance. I mean, today there are huge demonstrations scheduled to take place all across the United States. That I think that the anti-war sentiment is at an all-time high because people are questioning to an unprecedented degree the legality and the morality of war, as well as the fact that we have more important things to worry about, such as climate change, such as the environment, other environmental concerns, the development. War costs a lot of money. We need to put these resources at home. So the forces of militarism and the ability to kill a lot of people is getting more and more. It's very scary. But also I think the ability of people to prevent war has never been higher.
What are your advices for a counter-revolution? What you will say? What will you advise us if there is
I mentioned
counter-revolution?
Like I mentioned, plan ahead, mobilize. Think of scenarios. I actually have a monograph that's available online where I look at a dozen cases of coup d'états and how the population mobilized to defeat them within either a few days or a couple of weeks. There's Gene Sharp also has a monograph called The Anti-Coup, which talks about that. So these people can study cases of how people have done so. But like I said, have community groups and other associations say, okay, if the coup goes on, this is what you do. You again seize this intersection or bridge. Have the tools. Again, have a broadcast center. Or if the military takes over the radio and TV stations, you have several hidden facilities where you can broadcast instructions for people and let people know what's really going on. Figure out various places where people can assembly, organize. But it takes planning, and Because what's remarkable about these coups, the reversals that I studied, was it was largely spontaneous, most of these. But you can't rely on spontaneity. You need to, it's much likely, just like in anything else, the more you practice, the more you train, the more successful you'll be.
USA are glad to hear that revolution is success. What are the real benefits that benefits and consequences that USA will gain from our security stability?
Okay, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I didn't quite understand.
What are the consequences and benefits that USA will gain from our security stability?
Yeah. Okay. Well, basically, I mean, a democratic and stable Sudan is important, I think, for the United States and the world. You know, when Bashir was in power, he provided sanctuary for Al Qaeda. He supported other extremist groups, and including those that were destabilizing neighboring countries. So that was and a democratic Sudan would not do that kind of thing. So it's very much in the interest of the United States to support it. The problem is that the United States is good at punishing governments we don't like, but we're punishing governments that contribute to terrorism and instability and repression, things like that. But we're not very good at supporting alternatives. Of supporting governments that are trying to be democratic, that aren't supporting extremism, that aren't supporting violence. So I think what I will be arguing when I come back to the United States is that it's not just a matter of, I mean, there's obviously a moral imperative, in my view, of supporting Sudan and democracy and stability, but I think it's ultimately in the self-interest of the United States and the rest of the world to do so as well, because we sure don't want these guys back in power again. And we don't want the remnants of them to continue to thwarting the progress that the country needs to make.
Faisal Abbas. I am asking a question here. These United States and the other countries who are now helping the military regimes around Sudan and the princes at the Gulf area and the kingdom of the Gulf area, are they afraid that if Sudan is helped by United States and other countries, will play a democratic role that will be against them?
That's a very good point. I think Sudan, for authoritarian governments like Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, Egypt, Sudan is a threat of a good example. That I think there's a fear that that their people will see what the Sudanese people have done, and they might want to emulate it. They might want democratic change as well. I mean, that's the Salah government was in very big trouble, and the democratic forces, which included everybody from leftist to moderate Islamists to the Houthis to liberals. I mean, just a big cross-section of society. They came together with a plan for an interim government made of like 235 people representing the various forces in the country as an interim government, then to lead to democratic multi-party elections. But the Saudis, with support of the United States, said no. We wanted to turn over power to General Hadi, Salah's vice president, as the only candidate. And we saw what happened. That he had no legitimacy. The Houthis rose up. The rest of the country was divided. And we've had the horrible civil war that's been going on ever since. And I think Yemen is a good example of what happens when these authoritarian governments, with unfortunately the cooperation of the United States, suppressed the people's democratic demands and just tried to, bring it from one strong man to another. There's a lot for the Sudanese people to be proud of in your democratic revolution, as I've described. But there's also certain risks involved because, I said the good thing was that other people might try to emulate you to have their own democratic revolutions, but that's what makes Sudan kind of a threat to these autocratic governments who would like to see it fail. But again, that in many ways could be a vehicle for the Sudanese because, hey, it's your national pride. We're not going to let the Saudis or the Emiratis, the Egyptians, undermine our country. We're going to defend our country. We're going to defend our democracy, and it could be a rallying cry, to prevent the kind of intervention and to point out that people in the military and elsewhere are traitors by aligning themselves with these foreign dictatorships instead of the best interest of the Sudanese people.
Hi, sir. And he said he was doing a good job doing an interview. So that's the Trump government stand in Sudan issue. So my question is, what could Sudan or the Sudanese government expect from, let's say, a Joe Biden's government or a government led by Elizabeth Warren? Thank you.
Would certainly be, I think, more rational than Trump. He unfortunately is very much part of the foreign policy establishment. He was one of the minority of Democrats who supported Bush in invading Iraq, for example. He's also been a big supporter of Netanyahu and the Israeli occupation. I'm concerned that even if Biden is president, that some of the policies will continue. I do think the good thing is that Biden does tend to trust the State Department, Foreign Service officers, other professionals somewhat more, and I think there are those who would, that would like to see Sudan succeed, and so I don't think, again, I think it would be better than Trump, but I've actually been fairly critical of Biden's foreign policies. I've written a couple of articles about it, actually. I think some people like Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders would be much, much better in the sense that I think they do have a genuine commitment to sustainable development and to democracy. I've actually been volunteering somewhat as an advisor for the Warren campaign, and I've actually encouraged her to talk about Sudan as an example, or as an example to counter the short-sighted policies that Trump and Biden and others have pursued elsewhere in the Middle East.
To come to Sudan and be a part of this progress that's going on right now. Myself and others that are back in America believe that the only way that the American government would get involved here is Sudan, the new Sudanese government creates a financial system that has a legal framework with that incentivizes foreign investment, and that's